It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. He is the director of the Zaytuna Institute. And more than that, not just being someone I consider him my teacher, but I have to say that after September the 11th, there was a lot of confusion in North America, and I imagine there was a lot of confusion here. And in that wilderness of confusion came a voice of clarity, so connected to our tradition, yet so contemporary. And that voice was the voice of our Sheikh Hamza. He not only clarified, he gave us a vision. He said that this is not the catastrophe that everyone is making it out to be. This is a time for pause, a time for introspection. And communities across the world have taken that to heart. And when I talk, I know in North America, Chicago, Toronto, Montreal, Florida, Knoxville, Tennessee, California, communities where brothers and sisters have faced persecution, civil liberties violations, were inspired by the words of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and really took an opportunity to sit down and to look into their hearts and to say, what is our role in this? How do we need to draw ourselves closer to Allah? And what kind of work do we need to do to build the kind of world that all human beings need to live in? And he gave that perspective. And Jazakallahu khairan, may Allah bless him for giving us that perspective in a time that we needed perspective and vision and connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most. Recently, Sheikh Hamza, it was launched just 2 days ago, has completed a project which I know is close to his heart and the hearts of people like Sidi Abdul Latif Whiteman and many others, which is the project of the Burda, the great poem in praise of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sheikh Hamza has done a critical addition now of the translation with footnotes that really conveys the passionate love that we as believers have for our beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Printed in Turkey at the highest quality, the Burda set includes Sheikh Hamza's book, magnificent calligraphy by Sidi Muhammad Zakaria of the United States in a traditional Maghribi style, and on 3 CDs the entire Burda recited by the singers of Fez, Morocco, people who know this poem because they've taken it into their hearts. We only have today 28 copies of the Burda available, and more will be available soon, inshallah, and be available to the broader public. Sheikh Hamza last night made a very generous offer that 40% of the proceeds of the sales of the Burda will go to Q News. So those of you who, inshallah, after the program is over, after we have some closing remarks and dua by Sheikh Hamza, those of you who are interested can purchase, or you can contact Sandala Records or Abdul Latif Whiteman to get further copies of the Burda, because it is indeed a magnificent and grand effort. Brothers and sisters, without any further ado, it is not only our pleasure, but I think we are blessed by Allah to have the presence of our Shaykh Hamza Yusuf.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصل اللهم على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الحمد لله. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I was told that a few empty seats are people watching the football games, which we call in America soccer. And I think it's indicative of the times that people are more concerned about whether England beat Denmark or not than they are about what the recent developments between the Pakistani and Indian conflict is. I think it's very indicative of the state of people that they're more interested in entertainment than they are about very real and pressing issues that are confronting all of us. The time that we're living in is interesting to say the least, and the Chinese curse is we live in interesting times. I think people all over the world are feeling the immense pressure of the events that are happening at an increasingly rapid pace, which is one of the signs of the latter days, is that events take on a speed that becomes so overwhelming that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said people would wake up believers and they would go to sleep disbelievers, and they would go to sleep believers and wake up disbelievers. And he also said it would be a time when sagacious people would become confused. يُصْبِحُ الْحَلِيمُ حَيْرَانًا. And the word for sagacious is a beautiful word. Halim has many, many meanings in the Arabic language. The root word halama is to be forbearing. It's also related to the breast of a woman and a male, but the actual nipple in Arabic is called halama. And part of the reason for that is that it's a way of completely calming a child immediately. A child that's in a state of what the Quran calls hala, which is the state that human beings are created in a state of anxiety, that we are actually created in an anxious state. And what human beings are ultimately looking for is sakina, or the Hebrews call it shakina. It's something that was given to Bani Israel in the Tabut, which is a stillness, a tranquility that descends on the hearts of people who allow that tranquility into their hearts. The heart has to be open for it. If the heart is closed for it, that tranquility has no ability to enter into it. So we ourselves are often blocking the very thing that we're seeking, which is one of the ironic conditions of the human being. The very thing that we're looking for, we're actually preventing it from coming into our lives. The sakina is a beautiful word. The root word sakana means to be still. The word in Arabic for your domicile, the place where you live, is called meskan. It's meant to be a place of stillness, a place of a refuge, a place of tranquility. When the Quran talks about the male and the female, the Quran says that God created mates for you, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that you find sakina in your mate. And God has put between you mawadda and rahmah, love and mercy, because this is at the root of human desire, is to be in a state of tranquility, a state of peace. And this is ultimately what religion is about. It's about the search for peace. And one of the traditions says that when people enter into paradise, they can't stop repeating over and over again, salam. When they actually, their first experience of paradise is to say salam, 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 salam. And the Quran in Surah Yasin, قَوْلٌ مِّن رَبِّ الرَّحِيمِ, salam, قَوْلٌ مِّن رَبِّ الرَّحِيمِ, peace, a word from a merciful Lord. Just the word itself is a mercy. Salam. And it's a beautiful word because it has in it this sakina. It has in it a tranquility. And that's why Muslims are encouraged to greet each other with Salamu Alaikum, peace be upon you. And the Prophet ﷺ, in his first address to the Medinas, when he moved from Mecca to Medina, he said, and Abdullah bin Salam, who was the Jewish rabbi that embraced Islam, he was Abdullah bin Salam. When he went into the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, he said he wanted to hear the message of this man. And the Prophet's first khutbah, his first message in Medina was, he said, Ya ayyuhan nas. And nas, as we know, is an address not just to the believers, because when the believers are addressed, it says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. When humanity is addressed, it says, Ya ayyuhan nas. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ayyuhan nas, afshu salam, spread peace, wa at'imu ta'am, and feed the hungry food, wa sallu bil-layli wan-nasu niyam, and pray at times when others are asleep. تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِالسَّلَامِ, you will enter paradise in peace. And the message began with peace and ended with peace. The message began with peace and ended with peace. The Prophet, whenever he finished his prayer, he consistently said after every prayer, Allahumma anta as-salam, wa minka as-salam, وَإِلَيْكَ يَعُودَ السَّلَامِ فَأَحْيِينَا بِالسَّلَامِ. Oh God, you are peace, and you love peace. So give us peace, and cause us to live in peace. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, لَا تَمَنُّوا لِقَاءَ الْعَدُوِّ
Don't desire to meet your enemies in battle. وَلَكِنْ اسْأَلُوا اللَّهَ الْعَافِيَةَ. But ask Allah for peace and well-being. وَإِنْ لَقِيتُمُوهُمْ فَاثْبُتُوا. And if you do meet them in battle, if you're forced into it, then be brave. And this is why I would make the correction, and I appreciate the remarks by Raja very much. I would make the correction that a jihadi does not believe that the Quran enjoins Muslims to fight for just reasons. Every Muslim believes that. And if they don't believe it, they're denying something that is absolutely essential and clear in the Quran. And it's well known in the Iranian tradition, and given that we're in an Iranian or a mosque that is from the Shia tradition, they actually made jihad the sixth pillar, even though the Muslims of the Sunni tradition don't consider it a sixth pillar. But there is no negation of jihad in our tradition. None. But what does jihad mean? This is where we begin the debate. How do we define the term? And this is a problem because words have basic meanings and they have contextual meanings. And what we tend to do is conflate the basic with the contextual meaning, and it's a disaster. If you assume that the basic meaning of a word is its contextual meaning, then you will never understand human language. It is impossible to understand what people are trying to say. If I say tree, everybody in this room who speaks English will know that I'm talking about a type of vegetation that exists in the world that shares certain characteristics, like a trunk and branches and leaves. But if I say the tree of good and evil in the Christian tradition, it's a very different tree. So if I say the tree in Eden, I'm speaking contextually about a tree that is not referring to the basic meaning of tree, although the basic meaning has some inclusion in that meaning. So when we speak about jihad, what do we mean by jihad? Jihad means in its basic meaning struggle. It is the struggle of the world. And the world is struggle. There's nothing else in the world but struggle. The day you came into this world, I'm watching my 9-month-old struggle every day to get up and walk. And it's extraordinary because the struggle goes on. And he's getting better each day. And it's the extraordinary thing about it is he's never frustrated by the fact that he stands up and falls down. He just tries it again. He doesn't give up. Because he hasn't been taught to give up yet. That's learned behavior. People are domesticated. The Spanish called the Muslims mudajjanun, the domesticated ones. You see? And this is what every tyrannical government wants, to domesticate its people. To make them give up the struggle of standing on their own 2 feet, of standing upright. When I go to American airports now, everybody stands there, and you're arbitrarily picked out of a line. And you're told to raise your arm, spread your leg, and then a complete stranger begins to move this very bizarre machine around your body. He doesn't tell you quite what he's looking for because it's not just metal, obviously. They take off your shoes and they take some chemical strip and put it into and everybody does this. Bah, bah. This is what the sheep do. Right? They're just herded along, arbitrarily pulled out of the line. And the Fourth Amendment says that Americans are entitled to the protection of their lives and their property from illegal search and seizure. What does that mean, illegal search and seizure? It means search and seizure without due cause. And what is that arbitrary act? other than unjust cause? And why is it that I have been singled out every single time that I've flown? Every single time. And I said to them, it seems like this is not arbitrary, because this happens to me every time. No, it's a random search. And then a Muslim man who did the search in New York said, you're right. Get Muslims here all the time. So now we're guilty by the mere fact that we adhere to a religion which is 1/5 of the world's population. 1 out of every 5 people is now a suspected criminal on the planet. It helps also that they're brown in large numbers, because that's an easier way of doing your selective, arbitrary search. And I've said to these people, do you know anything about the Bill of Rights? And most of these people are paid $4.25 an hour. And unfortunately, they probably don't even know that there is a thing called the Bill of Rights. Really. And they just look at me, sorry about it, sir, just doing my job. Just doing my job. That kept coming up in Nuremberg. Just doing my job. The difference between what's happening in the U.S. and what happened in Nazi Germany is the swastika that they wore in Nazi Germany has a happy face on it in America. Really, they smile. It's all right. It's one. You know, when the FBI, they were nice. And I was with an Arab man when they came to visit us, and he shook his hand after this interview was over, and he said, he said, these aren't, this isn't intelligent. These are like educated, erudite, sophisticated people. And most of them, they had 4.0 or 3.8. They went to top schools in the United States. They probably played football. A lot of them were probably quarterbacks or halfbacks. And they're wholesome, clean guys. But they're also unaware that they're undermining the very thing that they actually swore to protect, which is the Bill of Rights. Most of which is not only consistent with the Islamic tradition, but actually some of it is derived from the Islamic tradition. So what's happening in the United States is what I see it as it's the increased domestication of a people that are traditionally quite resistant to that. Most Americans have guns. They have a sense of the right to defend themselves. When Waco, Texas was basically attacked, that group of people were attacked out there by the ATF. And Timothy McVeigh, the man who blew up the Oklahoma building, was there that day watching. He was actually a live observer to what was called by the ATF Operation Showtime. 19 children were incinerated. And basically there's a scene, because all this stuff was filmed on videotape. There's a scene where this man David Koresh, the religious leader of that community, a Seventh-day Adventist sect, said on videotape, he was shocked, and he said on videotape, this isn't about Christianity anymore. This is about constitutional rights. I'm an American, and you come here with guns and come in blazing, I'm going to shoot back. That's what he said. That was his argument. Timothy McVeigh, who was traumatized in the Gulf War, and if you read what Gore Vidal in his correspondence with Timothy McVeigh says, what you'll find is that Timothy McVeigh not only did not know there were children in the building, but when he found out there were, he said, that's unfortunate, but it's collateral damage. In other words, a word that was taught to him in Iraq. And when he finished his trial was finished, he quoted probably one of the most prominent constitutional authorities in the United States judicial history, which is Chief Justice Brandeis. And he said that Chief Justice Brandeis said, "Government is the omnipresent teacher of the people. What the government does, the people will learn and do in turn. And when the government becomes criminal, people will become criminal because they lose belief in law." And this is one of the reasons why the Muslim world is filled with governmental corruption and corruption in the marketplaces, because people have learned well the lessons of those put over them. Now, where does this all take us as individuals and as collective groups of people trying to deal with the circumstances that we find ourselves in? How is the struggle defined? If jihad is indeed a struggle, how do we define jihad as our struggle? Because if you're not in jihad at some level, you're not in Islam. If you're not struggling, you're outside. You've given up. And the believer doesn't give up. I would say that first of all, we have to recognize that times and places dictate behavior as well as what is said. And this is something many Muslims don't understand. If you look at the discourse in the Quran in Medina, it is not the same as the discourse in the Quran in Mecca, and it is very easy for most masters of Quran to recognize the distinct difference between the language of Medina and the language of Mecca, which is a very interesting proof as far as the Muslims are concerned to the divine nature of the Quran, because authors tend to write in similar genre. And yet the Medina discourse is completely different from the Meccan discourse. Why? Because circumstances change. After September 11th, a lot of people got upset with me because I wasn't saying things that I was saying prior to September 11th. Well, as far as I was concerned, circumstances changed. Circumstances changed. And the definition of rhetoric, which is the art of telling the truth according to Aristotle's definition, the Arabic definition of rhetoric is al-kalam alladhi yunasibu muqtada al-hal. It is speech that is appropriate given the circumstances you find yourself in. And I personally believe in the power of language. I believe in the power of words. I believe that the Quran, when it says that this is the kalam Allah, that the fact that God chose to introduce Himself throughout history with language, it indicates to me that the most powerful element in the world is language. And when Roger spoke of the trivialization of the media, what he was speaking about was the trivialization of language. And Muslims are people who have traditionally taken language very seriously and have recognized that the highest jihad is to speak the truth in the presence of unjust government. كَلِمَةُ حَقٍّ عِنْدَ سُلْطَانٍ جَائِرٍ. This is the highest jihad. The Quran says, وَجَاهِدْهُمْ بِهِ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا. Struggle against those who reject the truth with the Quran, in a great way, in a jihad kabir. That is a jihad of the tongue. It's called jihad al-lisan, which is not the same as jihad as-sayf. They're not the same. there are different types of jihad. They have different function. One of the things that the Muslims have forgotten is that the word da'wah, which in the extraordinary Quranic language is the word in which you call people to Islam. The word means an invitation to a banquet in the Arabic language. Now, my friend Muhammad Zakaria, who wrote the preface to the Burda, said in that preface, Islam is an invitation. And in order for that invitation to be real, it must be open to both rejection and acceptance. And that is why the Quran has never commanded people to persecute other people because of their rejection of Islam. It had commanded the Muslims to fight against those who persecuted them for their belief in Islam, not to fight those who chose not to believe in Islam, because the choice is a divine gift. It's a gift from the Lord of the Quran. لِمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ. Whoever wants to believe in this book, let him believe. And whoever wants to reject the book, let him reject it. And you كَلَّا سَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. You will come to know. That's the basic premise of the entire Quranic discourse, is to reserve judgment until the next life. And then it will become clear. When you die, either there's nothing or there's something. If there's something, either the Christians are right, the Buddhists are right, the Hindus are right, the Muslims are right. And according to the Islamic tradition, they all have some historical truth. All of these great revelatory teachings have this historical truth. And that is why Muslims traditionally honor the peoples of the book. In a day and age in which Muslims react to any dissent amongst their ranks by wanting to pull out the baseball bat if you're in America, or the cricket bat if you're in England, and smash the person they disagree with over the head, either verbally or physically. One has to wonder about what's happened to our civilizational discourse when Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu debated atheists in public forums, listening to them in front of thousands of Muslims. Because Muslims did not shy away from debate. Debate is at the essence of the human condition. And we learn so much through dialogue. I said to somebody the other day that I read in Pat Buchanan's book, The Death of the West, and she said, "You read Pat Buchanan?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm interested in what he has to say." There's a lot of people that agree with him in America. And I'm interested in what chord he's striking. She said, "I could never read that person. I disagree with everything he said." First of all, if you haven't read him, how do you know you disagree with everything he said? Second of all, if you only read people or listen to people you agree with, how will you ever be challenged to grow? Because part of growth is the challenge. The reason that my boy is increasing every day in his ability is that he's going up against a challenge, which is the attempt to walk on his own 2 feet so he can be independent, so he doesn't have to be carried around by his mother or his father. So he too can feel that he's an independent human being that can stand on his own 2 feet. But he arrived at that through taking up the challenge of going from crawling to walking on 4 to walking on 2 to running. This is it. This is the human challenge. It's to stand upright, to speak upright, to be upright. And Muslims have forgotten that traditionally we were people that not only challenged our own ranks, but we challenged the ranks of others. We challenged them in their assumptions. And now the Muslim voice is not only almost non-existent, but when it does emerge, it often emerges in a way that makes Muslims shameful. Because it's filled with anger, with resentment, with hatred. And when you look at the Prophet ﷺ and look how he spoke with people, and look at this ayah, وَقُولُ لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, speak beautifully to people. Speak to them in beautiful ways. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. Who is more beautiful in his speech than the one that invites others to God? And he himself is upright. Who is more beautiful in speech than that? Inviting to God, an invitation to God. And that is what the Quran is. It's an invitation. And anybody that wants to come can come, and anybody that doesn't want to come. Not only did the Muslims historically accept that rejection of the invitation, but they took it upon themselves to protect those people. To protect them and their right to reject Islam. And this is the dhimmi status. And this is why I am proud to be a member of a religion that over 1,000 years ago was teaching pluralism, was teaching tolerance, was rejecting the discourse of racism. I am proud of the fact that I can say my prophet said, and I know of no other historical prophet that actually condemned racism in no uncertain terms. When he said there is no preference of a black man over a white man or a white man over a black man, except in consciousness, in his awareness of his God. And that is something known to God. I am proud to be of a community that one of our greatest leaders, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, whose counterpart is honored at the parliament with a statue. And I would hope one day that the British erect a statue of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi to be next to him at that parliament. Because Salahuddin al-Ayyubi is a universal man. He's a man that is not just the property of the Muslims. He's the property of anybody that believes in what is true and what is right. Because this is a man who led an army into Jerusalem after decades of persecution and oppression at the hands of Christian Europeans, who in their own records admit that blood flowed in the streets of Jerusalem up to the ankles of their horses. That in one day alone, 70,000 men, women, and children were killed. And this is a man that when he entered that city, not only did he give a general amnesty, but he gave them the right to go back to their countries in Europe with their property and demanded that Sunday church be held the next day in their churches. And not only that, he reinstated the right, the divine right of every Jew on this planet to go to Jerusalem and celebrate the place that they hold sacred. The divine right, that is a right from God that every Jew has to. And the issue of Palestine is not an issue of religion, it's an issue of sovereignty. We are not people that are hateful of the Jews. And if you are, then you're misinterpreting your religion. Because we have testimony time and again of the honor that the Muslims gave of the letters that were sent out by the Ottomans to their embassies in Europe, telling them to encourage the Jews who are being persecuted in the lands of the Christians to migrate to the Ottoman lands. We have Jewish rabbis recorded in works by Bernard Lewis in The Jews Under Islam, in which he clearly states that rabbis in the Ottoman Empire sent letters to their co-religionists saying, leave the oppression of the Christians and come to the land of the Muslims where you will flourish. This is the religion of Islam. And this message is never more important than in the time in which we are living, whereby religious conflict, racial and ethnic conflict, economic conflict is tearing us apart. It is tearing us apart as human beings. And in an age of mass destruction, we cannot afford to pull at this very, very fragile fabric that we call civilization. Because it is very easy to lose it. And when it's lost, it's very easy to get it back. And just ask the Afghani people, who since 1973 have been dealing with the fact that their country has been under the worst forms of tyranny, anarchy, and finally an attempt of a beleaguered people raised in the hell of war to reestablish some type of security within the borders of their society, which is a divine right. And people laughed at them and mocked them, demonized them. They made mistakes. But given the circumstances, would people in this country fare any better? We have immense work to do. Education. Dissemination of a voice that needs to be heard. Once again, it needs to be heard powerfully, and it needs to be spoken powerfully and heard. And the beauty of fair-minded people everywhere, and I believe that if we can get beyond the emotionalism, if we can get beyond the provincialism, we can get to some core values that we share as human beings. And we as Muslims in our own tradition believe in Abu Mansur al-Maturidi and the Maturidi school's distinction of natural revelation and the revelation that is prophetic. Natural revelation is an awareness that the intellect has the capacity to discern right and wrong. And this is why justice is a shared concept. We might differ on the particulars, but the universals are in agreement. And this is why Muslims can go to a non-Muslim court, contesting, and feel that they've been judged fairly in many instances. And this has happened. And most Muslims would believe that they have a greater chance of getting a fair trial in England than they do in many Muslim countries. Because we do share these common threads of our humanity and our civilization. And this is what we have to speak to. And fair-minded people will hear it. But we have to speak effectively. And I want to finish with some Quran, but I want to give you one example of why I do not believe it has to be our historical destiny in these countries to be laughed at, to be ridiculed, to be mocked, to be looked on with contempt. I have done my own poll of asking people of different nationalities, of different countries, who is the most beloved athlete of the 20th century? Almost invariably, every person I have asked without thinking has said Muhammad Ali. And I said, isn't it interesting that a black man who is Muslim and has the name Muhammad is the most beloved athlete in the world? Why is that? The reason I believe is very simple. He embodies, in his own way, certain aspects of the sunnah of his Prophet. And even those who fought the Prophet Muhammad secretly admired him. They secretly admired him. Because Muhammad Ali was beautiful. He was beautiful to look at. When he smiled, that smile penetrated the hearts of even people that didn't like him. He had absolute self-confidence. When he spoke with complete certainty. He had no self-doubt. When the microphone was stuck in after fighting a very intense fight with Sonny Liston at the age of 22, when most boxers would have had eyes so swollen you couldn't see them, be so dumbed and dazed by being pulverized by the heavyweight champion of the world. When Cassius Clay had that microphone put in his face, what did he tell the world? And the world was listening. He said, I'm 22 years old. I don't have a scratch on my face. I'm beautiful. I talk to God every day. I must be the greatest. I just beat Sonny Liston because all the odds were against him. Muhammad Ali was a winner. He was a winner. Even when he lost, he was a winner. Because we forget that losers can be winners. And the Prophet ﷺ was always winning. When he went to Taqif, and they mocked him, they threw stones at him, they caused his feet to bleed, what did he say in his dua? Ya Rabb al-Mustada'afin, O Lord of the oppressed in the earth, إِلَى مَنْ تَكِلُونَ, who will you leave me with? إِلَى عَدُوٍ يَتَدَهَّمُنِي, to an enemy that will treat me like hell. إِلَى بَعِيدٍ لَا يَعْرَفُنِي, to some distant person who knows nothing of me. إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ سَخَطُكَ عَلَيَّ فَلَا أُبَالِي, if you are not angry with me, I have no concern. That is the dua of the Prophet ﷺ in what appeared to be the lowest point of his mission. His point was, this is all from you, and I recognize that because this is the nature of the struggle. You have valleys and you have peaks. And this happens to be a valley, but valleys can be beautiful if you see God in the valley, just as peaks can be beautiful if you see God in the peaks. But if you're in the peaks or the valleys and you don't see God, you've missed the beauty. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ was loved by anyone who came to know him. Muhammad Alexander Webb, who was a friend of Teddy Roosevelt, who became Muslim in the Philippines, challenged the people of the Parliament of Religions to find out about Islam and about this man in a real, truthful way, and then tell me that this man was not a prophet. Because I have no doubts that he was a prophet. And anybody that looks at his life should have no doubts. What we should be debating is, are prophets indeed emissaries of God? The debate is not whether this man lived the life of a prophet, because we know the lives of prophets. And his life is an exemplary life. The prophets of the Old Testament are tainted by the Old Testament's descriptions of them. So this is the message, and it's open. And there are people out there that if they know who he was, they might not accept him as their personal prophet. But like George Sale, they will say, as he said in 1734, in this country that has these unusual sparks of fair-mindedness, he said, why do we demonize this man who, although we don't agree that he is a divine emissary, he is one of the great men of history, and we should recognize him as such. In a time when we have people on national television in the United States saying the most hideous things about a man that the Jewish historian Michael Hart said was the most influential human being that ever lived, a Jewish historian, in his book, The 100 Most Important Historical Persons, he listed the Prophet Muhammad as the most influential human being that ever lived. The fact that people can get on national television and say these things is indicative of how much work we have to do. And my challenge to you is to say, like the Prophet said, when the mushrikeen, when they were, is that these people, they don't know what they're saying. They don't know who he is. They read some pamphlet. They read some ridiculous. They're ignorant. The ones who aren't ignorant, God will take those to account. كَفَيْنَاكَ الْمُسْتَهْزِئِينَ. God has taken care of those who mock you. Those who mock are another group of people. Ignorant people, and mockers are ignorant, but ignorant people who speak out of emotion, who speak out of ignorance, these people need to be educated. And there are those that we will win over. If not as people that embrace Islam, as people that begin to see that this is a great tradition, it's a wisdom tradition, and the West has learned much in the past from this tradition and has much to learn today and tomorrow from this tradition. So I would hope that we support this voice, which is a voice for Muslims. It's an articulate voice. It's been a voice committed to improving its ability to speak on behalf of Muslims. And it needs help. And this is the time. And the people in this room should all commit to helping to establish an endowment. And I just want to end with, because one of the things that I realized, and I do have regrets for some things I said, not everything. The vast majority of what I've said in the past I would stand by. But anything that does not reflect the spirit of our Prophet ﷺ, I reject. In my own discourse, in my own actions, I reject it as something that I need to work on. And that's the nature of this teaching. It's a struggle. I'm still learning to walk upright. Like my 9-month-old. I'm still learning, and I fall, and I spiritually fall, and I fall. And that is the nature of the human condition. But I'm committed to trying to get back up again and brushing myself off and carrying on. And I would say that one of the dangers that many Muslims have fallen into is mockery. Take your enemies very seriously. Don't mock them. Be like Umar ibn al-Khattab. He took his enemies seriously when they were Muslims, and he took his enemies seriously when he was a Muslim. But he never mocked. The Prophet ﷺ never mocked anyone. He never made fun of them. All of his humor was characterized by honoring people, not by making them the brunt of his jokes. And so we should be wary of language that mocks anyone. When Musa, who is the prophet most told of in the Quran, because he represents this eternal struggle between the Pharaonic model and the Mosaic model, the model of liberation and the model of control. And the struggle still goes on. When he was told to go to Pharaoh, he said, "Idhab anta wa akhuka bi'ayati." Go, you and your brother, with my son. "Idhab ila Fir'auna innahu tagha." Go to Pharaoh because he has transgressed the boundaries. And one of the beauties of the Quran, it never goes into details. It always leaves this kind of veiling, because the details become very disgusting of what people do, the details of their crimes. We don't want to know the details. إِنَّهُ طَغَى فَقُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. And speak to him gently. Speak to him gently. لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَى. That perhaps he might recollect and have awe of his Creator. This is Moses, the prophet, speaking to Pharaoh, the worst tyrant in the world at his time, and one of the worst in the history of human civilization. A man who said, "Ana rabbukum al-a'la," a man who claimed to be God, and yet the Quran says, "Speak to this man who's claiming to be me gently." قُولَ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Why? لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ وَيَخْشَى. قَالَ رَبَّنَا إِنَّنَا نَخَافُ أَنْ يَفْرُطَ عَلَيْنَا. We have fear that he will do terrible things to us. أَوْ أَنْ يَطْغَى, or he will oppress us. So this is the human fear of opposing power. There is that fear. قال لا تخافا, have no fear. Have no fear. إنني معكما أسمع وأرى. I am with you, I hear and I see. فأتياه فقولا إنا رسول ربك فأرسل معنا بني إسرائيل. Go to him and say, give us the children of Israel, ولا تعذبهم, and don't persecute them. This is Jihad al-Akbar. The Quran didn't say create a little cell and go and blow up the pyramids, and after you do that, assassinate the head of state, and do this all furtively and secretly, and don't tell anybody. It said, go and declare your truth. Go and speak your truth. Why? Because don't despair of the mercy of your Lord, even in your enemies. Because Iblis is the one, ablasa. He's the one that despairs. Never despair. The Prophet ﷺ said, أحبب حبيبك هون ما عسى أن يكون بغيضك يوم ما وأبغض بغيضك هون ما عسى أن يكون حبيبك يوم ما. Never hate to an extreme. Never loathe anybody to an extreme, because he may one day be a close friend, an intimate friend. I mean, we should beware of hating those who do us wrong. We should be very wary of this. And I'm not saying not to feel righteous indignation, because that is a gift from God. But righteous indignation is not anger and hatred. It's something that emerges in the soul when you see wrong, and it causes you to right that wrong in the appropriate way. And that is the message of Islam. Righting wrongs in the appropriate way. It's not blowing up indiscriminately. It's not killing people that you don't know whether they're for you or against you. It's acting civilly, it's acting according to the law. And when we do fight, we fight with the rules of engagement. We're not utilitarians. We're not people that believe that the end justifies the means. We're people that believe if the end is noble, then the means must be noble to achieve that end. Assalamu alaikum.